Assad has been in office since July 2000 after succeeding his father, Hafez. He's refused to resign from the presidency despite Syria's decade-long civil war and international pressure. Well, Bashar al-Assad has taken his oath as Syria faces an economic crisis. The Syrian pound's value plunged to record lows this year, causing skyrocketing inflation, and the government's hiked up prices of basic goods such as petrol, bread, sugar and rice. More than 80% of the population live in poverty. The World Food Programme says almost 12.5 million people struggle to find enough food every day. Assad says the economic crisis in neighbouring Lebanon is now a bigger challenge than Western sanctions. That's because its companies can no longer circumvent sanctions through Lebanon to pay for imported goods. Assad claims at least $40 to $60 million worth of funds are stuck in Lebanon since banks there locked accounts and blocked transfers. Well, earlier I spoke to Joshua Landis. He's director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He says there's very little the Syrian government can do to tackle the economic crisis.
That's the desperate situation of the Syrians. They are waiting to hear for some light at the end of the tunnel. And he made a lot of excuses, saying that the Lebanese collapse of the banking system in Lebanon, where almost all Syrians did their banking and held their, whatever money they had were held in these Lebanese accounts. And he was counting on that money to be invested in Syria for rebuilding. But as he said, somewhere near $40 billion disappeared. And it's very hard because other countries, whether it's Lebanon, the Gulf countries, Iraq, are not allowed to invest in Syria, or they may be sanctioned, companies from outside. So Syrians are in a desperate situation. The average Syrian has about 20% of the wealth that they had before the revolution. I know my wife's relatives are all suffering terribly. They get about 1 to 2 hours of electricity a day. My mother-in-law complains that the only use for the refrigerator is to keep ants away from the food. And that's the kind of gallows humor that Syrians are using today.
Talk us through briefly the relationship between Syria and Lebanon in relation to, obviously, these billions of dollars, millions of dollars, which Bashar al-Assad claims are stuck in Lebanese banks.
Syria was a socialist country. It didn't have private banks. It was just beginning to establish private banks. But everybody didn't trust the government, and they kept their money in Lebanese banks, which they did trust and had been hooked to the dollar for 23 years, meaning that the exchange rates wouldn't fluctuate. So people put their money in these dollar accounts, and Lebanon went bankrupt. They had been running a Ponzi scheme. All the money was gone. And that means Syrians, the Syrian currency, since the bankruptcy in Lebanon, has fallen from 500 to $1 to 4,000 to $1. So people's wealth just collapsed.
Is the Bashar al-Assad government really got the motivation to do something about the economy if it has essentially the get-out clause of being able to say this is all down to the sanctions, there's nothing we can do about this?
Well, he did say that the sanctions could be dealt with and that they can get around them. He said we won't say how, but you know, Syria doesn't have money. Russia and China and so forth are willing to invest a little bit, but only in industries like oil, phosphates, where they can get their rewards and get their money back out. So this is a very bad situation. Iraq, as we know, is near bankruptcy. Lebanon just fell into bankruptcy. So the main trading partners, Jordan as well, that Syria would normally count on for investment, for tourism, for trade, are all in desperate situation. And this is a region-wide collapse.